Hey, what's up, Journey? I hope you guys are all doing well. As you can see, we're back with another drop, another video, another episode of Rutabagas of the Spirit. And first and foremost, I want to apologize on my behalf and on Pastor Adam's behalf. We haven't really hopped on and done a Rutabagas of the Spirit. I've been a little bit busy. I took like a little 1 week, week and a half vacation, and Pastor Adam and Miss Cassandra have been busy with their own things. So Pastor Adam asked me like, "Yo, can you hop on and do a Rutabagas of the Spirit this week?" So you know what? I said, I'm down. Let's get it. And so, of course, we're back with James Cone, God of the Oppressed. I finished this book about a month and a half ago. So I had to kind of just pick it back up, skim through a chapter that I wanted to talk about. And so that's where we're at right now. And today we'll be talking about liberation and the Christian ethic. And the reason I picked this is chapter 9, by the way, if you have the book. But the reason I picked this chapter is because I think that we're living in such a unique time in our society, in our churches, in our communities, in our nation, that I think it's really good for us to look at our ethics and ask ourselves, why is it that we believe what we believe, and why is it that we do what we do? And I feel like as Christians, as believers, we tend to, either jokingly or seriously ask this question. I'm sure you've heard it. What would Jesus do? Or what would Jesus say? And we kind of base our ethics and our morals and the things that we act on, the things we don't act on, the things we say, the things we don't say, based on that question. What would Jesus do? We tend to pinpoint 2,000 years ago the life of Jesus, and look at the life of Jesus and read the life of Jesus and say, okay, Jesus didn't do this, so I'm not going to do that either. Or Jesus said this, so I'm going to say that. Or Jesus talk like this, so I'm gonna talk like that. And that's kind of what we believe that we have to do as Christians, that we have to do as disciples of Christ, as followers of Christ. And I understand where the confusion can lie, but I really love how James Cone really touches on that question, and he doesn't really ask what would Jesus do, but instead he asks, what is Jesus doing? So there's a difference. And I'm gonna just get right into it. Like I said in a previous Rutabagas of the Spirit, no introduction needed for James Cone anymore. I feel like I've talked about him enough, and we kind of know who he is. So I just want to dive straight into reading some of the things that stuck out to me, and then we'll just have a dialogue, a conversation from there. But before we get started, why don't you go ahead and make sure to like this video, share this video so you're not watching it alone, comment and subscribe, and go ahead and turn on those post notifications so you always know when we're posting. But other than that, I'm gonna get straight into it. Again, I'm gonna be reading some snippets from chapter 9, liberation and the Christian ethic. And I want to start with this passage right here. It says, the encounter of God's liberating presence includes hearing the call to be obedient to the claim of divine freedom. Christian behavior is basically the behavior that arises out of the oppressed community in response to God's call to be obedient, to be obedient to God's will. But the will of God is not a set of rules and principles of behavior derived from a philosophical study of the good, quote unquote good, by the way. We cannot know or hear the will of God apart from the social context of the oppressed community where Jesus is found calling us into being for freedom. So right here, James Cone is letting us know right off the bat that, hey, do you want to hear the will of God? Then you have to root yourself into these oppressed communities. You have to see where the struggle for freedom is happening, and that's where you'll find God. And I'm gonna just keep reading some of the things that I find important and that stand out to me. It says, to live as a Christian simply means being what God has made us, namely, liberated creatures committed to the freedom of humanity. Let me say that again. What has God made us to be? He's made us to be liberated creatures, free creatures committed to the freedom of humanity, to the freedom of creation, to the freedom of other beings. We've been called into freedom and into freeing other creatures, God's creation. That's kind of like the starting point for our Christian ethics, to know our behavior and to know what we were made for. But I'm gonna just keep reading. It says, therefore, the answer of the ethical question, what am I to do? Have you guys ever asked yourself that question? You've been in that season of just confusion or doubt, like, yo, what am I to do? Like, what is my calling? What is my purpose? You've been through the studies, you've been baptized, you've been in the church for so long, but you kind of just feel that you're in a drought, or that your church is in a drought, and you don't know what season God wants to call you in. Well, the first thing that you have to ask yourself is, what am I to do? James Cone gives us the answer, and I love it. It says, it can be stated simply: be a liberator of Christ, because that is what you are. You want to know what you were created to be? You were created to be a liberator of Christ. You were created to be a co-laborer of Christ. And these are just quick highlights that I just really wanted to pinpoint and just really talk about. But here's where we get into more of the ethics part. It says that thus the difference between Christian ethics and non-Christian ethics does not lie in particular acts, but in the source from which the acts arise. It says, for Christians, Jesus is the source for what we do. Without his power to make life human, our behavior would count as nothing. For Jesus is the criterion of our ethical judgment. For we do not simply ask, what would Jesus do, as if he is an ethical principle to be applied without the risk of faith. We ask, what is he doing now in America and elsewhere to heal the sick and to liberate the prisoners? That is not an easy question. Therefore, our answer to that question must be tested by other oppressed people who are involved in the struggle of freedom. And then James Cone just continues to talk about how we must have a dialogue with scripture, a dialogue with tradition, a dialogue with culture, a dialogue with experiences and things like that. But the one thing that I do want to just stop and talk about right here is that, like, Jesus, yes, is the focal point of our lives. Jesus, yes, is the center of our lives. But we should not just keep asking, what is it that Jesus did, and continue to live our lives like that. We must be continually asking, what is Jesus doing now? What is Jesus doing now? Where is Jesus now? And when we start asking those questions, we start to be in this pursuit of Jesus. We start to be in this pursuit of Christ. And I really think that it's important that we ask ourselves those questions, because if what James Cone has been saying throughout this entire book is true, then we can find Jesus in the oppressed communities, in people who are in a struggle for freedom. And if we can find Jesus in those places, and if we are called to be liberators of Christ, I think you guys know where I'm headed here, then we are called to be in those oppressed communities. We are called to just run and throw ourselves into those oppressed communities. Some of us might be in those oppressed communities, so we're called to even uplift the oppression around us and move towards freedom. I mean, what does that really look like? I mean, it might look different in your community. It might look different in your context. But I'm just looking at based off our nation, off in America's context. Minorities are the oppressed community here. Black people are the oppressed community here. Hispanics and immigrants are the oppressed community here. the Native Americans are oppressed communities here. If we look in our communities, in our churches, in society, the LGBT community is an oppressed community, right? These are all oppressed communities in which we can see God moving, where we can see the presence of Jesus in there. And as a Christian and as a follower of Jesus, we're called to run into those communities and help that struggle for freedom. And so I know a lot of us might be looking at this whole, there's divisions in regards to this whole Black Lives Matter movement. But I just want to say that at the bottom line, Black lives do matter. And if your opinion does not lie, if your ethics does not associate with Black Lives Matter, then you do not have the right to be called a Christian. We're just laying it out flat as it is. Because what you're saying is that one human being's life does not matter because of their color or their skin. That simply is not ethical, and it certainly is not a Christian ethic to go by. Now, I know a lot of people are divided in that stance of Black Lives Matter, because a lot of people might be saying, well, do you not see these riots that are happening, right? Or the looting, or the everything that's just happening, right? And people might even start defending people who are against these protests, who are against these riots. But don't worry, guys. James Cone helps us unpack this whole dilemma of violence and ethics and Jesus and where does he stand? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus say? And so I'm just going to read, and then I'm going to just go from there, and let me know what you guys think into regards to what I'm saying. Or in regards to what James Cone is saying. So yeah, in regards to violence, this is what James Cone is saying. It says, violence is not only what black people do to white people as victims seek to change the structure of their existence, it is also what white people did when they created a society for white people only, and what they do in order to maintain it. Violence in America did not begin with the Black Power movement or with the Black Panther Party. Neither is it limited to a Symbionese Liberation Army. Contrary to popular white opinion, violence has a long history in America. This country was born in violent revolution. Remember 1776? And it has been sustained by the violent extermination of red people and the violent enslavement of black people. Straight up, man, James Cone is laying it out how it is. He's saying you want to talk about violence, and for some reason, every time we think of violence, every time we look at these protests and riots, we immediately turn to black people and say, well, this is your fault. Man, there's something about anytime you guys come together as a community, violence always has to happen, right? But that's only because America has defined violence in black terms, right? America has defined violence being equivalent to your skin color having a lot of melanin, right? But America has never defined violence with the white person. And he's saying here that, are you forgetting how this country was even formed? Are you forgetting everything? Are you forgetting what white people continue to do to make sure that they hold positions in power? Are you forgetting what white people have done to black people, to red people, to brown people, to all sorts of people all across the globe? And so that's kind of where he's going to start this conversation about violence. But he keeps going. He says, white people have distorted the conception of the meaning of violence. They like to think of violence as breaking the laws of their society, but that is a narrow and racist understanding of reality. There is a more deadly form of violence, and it is camouflaged in such slogans as law and order, freedom and democracy, and the American way of life. I'm speaking of white-collar violence, the violence of Christian murderers and patriot citizens who define right in terms of whiteness and wrong as blackness. These are the people who hire assassins to do their dirty work while they piously congratulate themselves for being good and non-violent. The assassins are the police who patrol our streets, killing our men, women, and children. I don't even have to say it. You guys know exactly what I'm referring to. What happened a week and a half ago? What happened 2 weeks ago? It does not stop. It does not stop. Police continue to take innocent lives, right? You've seen the videos, you've seen everything going around, and this is why it's pivotal that we have these conversations inside the church. This is why we're doing this. This is why Pastor Adam is always asking me, like, yo, can you do a James Cone, right? Because he understands that we need to have these conversations, and we need to understand that there is assassins patrolling our streets, that there is people killing our fathers, killing our mothers, killing our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, our aunts, our uncles, are taking lives straight up, right? And so we have to get to the root of this. And he keeps going. He says, I contend therefore that the problem of violence is not the problem of a few black revolutionaries, but the problem of a whole social structure which outwardly appears to be ordered and respectable, but inwardly is ridden by psychopathic obsessions and delusions, racism and hatred. Violence is embedded in American law, and it is blessed by the keepers of moral sanctity. This is the core of the problem of violence, and it will not be solved by romanticizing American history, pretending that Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Vietnam are the first American crimes against humanity. If we take seriously the idea of human dignity, then we know that the annihilation of Indians, the enslavement of Africans, the making of heroes out of slaveholders like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were America's first crimes against humankind. And it does not help the matter at all to attribute black slavery to economic necessity or an accident of history. America is an unjust society, and black people have known that for a long time. Sheesh. Talk to them, James Cone. This is what American violence looks like. I promise you, it's not the looting. I promise you, it's not a couple riots. I promise you, it's not it's not a couple people spray painting something on a wall. That's not what violence is. This is America's true violence. And it's important that we have these conversations again, because when we're having these conversations, we can then ask the question, okay, Jesus, I see it. So where are you? But let's keep reading to find that out. And this is where James Cone gets into this dilemma of violence and non-violence. I know as Christians, we have this idea that we must be pacifists, right? I'm not telling you to be violent. I myself consider myself to be pretty pacifist. I don't really get angry too fast. I try to shy away from conflict, any serious conflict, right? It's not, I don't shy away from my problems, but I try to shy away from like physical conflict. Like that's just not the person that I am. And you know, it's just, you know, Jesus taught us turn the other cheek type stuff. And again, we will go back to, okay, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? But here he gets to this dilemma of violence versus non-violence, and I want to know what you guys think of it. He says, if violence versus non-violence is not the issue, but rather the creation of a new humanity, then the critical question for Christians is not whether Jesus committed violence or whether violence is theoretically consistent with love and reconciliation. We repeat, the question is not what Jesus did, as if his behavior in first century Palestine were the infallible ethical guide for our actions today. We must ask not what he did, but what is he doing? And what he did becomes important only insofar as it points to his activity today. To use the Jesus of history as an absolute ethical guide for people today is to become enslaved to the past, foreclosing God's eschatological future and its judgment on the present. It removes the element of risk in ethical decisions and makes people slaves to principles. But the gospel of Jesus means liberation, and one essential element of that liberation is the existential burden of making decisions about human liberation without completely sure what Jesus did or would do. This is the risk of faith. Though the Jesus of yesterday is important for our ethical decisions today, we must be careful where we locate that importance. It is not found in following in his steps slavishly and imitating his behavior in Palestine. Rather, we must regard his past activity as a pointer to what he is doing now. His actions were not as much examples as signs of God's eschatological future and the divine will to liberate all people from slavery and oppression. In Jesus' exorcisms and his eating and drinking with the oppressed, he was pointing to the new age that was breaking into the present, disrupting the order of justice. Does that sound familiar? Disrupting the order of justice. I'm going to keep reading though. The new age of the coming kingdom means a revolutionary usurpation of the present value system. The last shall be first and the first last. Herein is the ethical import of Jesus' words and deeds. They were concrete signs that the new age is dawning right in the social context of the people. They mean nothing to those who do not have the eyes of faith to see that something revolutionary is taking place in the midst of the people. The truth of Jesus' ethical presence is not found through a rational investigation of his deeds or works. It is found in what they bear witness to, namely God's will to liberate the weak and the helpless. Therefore, if we today want to understand the meaning of Jesus' past existence in relation to his present existence with us, we must approach the problem not with the method of philosophy, but from that perspective of faith which arises from the dispossessed, because their social existence bear witness to the vision of a coming new age. As Christians who have seen the signs of the liberating kingdom, we are commanded not to follow philosophical principles, but to discover the will of God in a troubled and dehumanized world. Concretely, we must decide not between good and evil, right and wrong, but between the old and the new age. The former being represented in the oppressors and the latter in the struggle of the little ones to be free. We must ask and answer the question, whose actions, those of the oppressed or the oppressors, are consistent with God's work in history? Either we believe God's will be revealed in the status quo of America or in the actions of those who seek to change it. I know that was a lot that I just read, but the question at hand is, what side are you going to take? The oppressors who are stripping away freedom, or the oppressed who are fighting for freedom? Now, granted, you may not be the violent type. Granted, the riots and the looting may not be your thing. And I'm gonna just say that, right? Not literally most of the protests, if not all protests, don't include rioting or looting. That's literally just what the media wants to highlight, again, because this is what the oppressor wants to highlight to keep us in bondage, right? But which side are you going to take? And if you really want to stick to what would Jesus do, then ask yourself that, what was Jesus doing? Right? Breaking bread with tax collectors, right? Hanging out with basically the lowest of the low. He was breaking the status quo. He was redefining justice. And maybe redefining justice looks different now to us, right? We can't mimic we can't mimic what a Jew was doing in first century Palestine. And we cannot mimic that. But we can ask, okay, Jesus, where are you now? And what does that look like? And what do you want me to do? And how can I help? Look, I'm not an ethics teacher. I'm barely struggling to explain what James Cone is saying. But these are the questions that we can start with. We can start with these questions as a community, right? I'm not here to give you the answers. I'm here to just give you information, and hopefully you guys can give me answers. Like, let me know in the comments. Send us an email. Let us know, hey, Journey, this is what we can do. This is how we can help. Our stances and our choices must align with the oppressed communities and in helping them be free, right? This isn't just freedom. Isn't just about freedom from sin. Isn't just about feeling good and worshiping on the Sabbaths and making sure that you're on a good diet. That's not what freedom looks like. That's probably like very low amount of freedom. You want to know what real freedom looks like? Real freedom and the real struggle to freedom looks like churches and communities helping one another, making sure that Black families stay together, that they don't have to fear losing a loved one every single day, not knowing whether or not that is this going to be my last day seeing my family, because people have seen my skin color as dangerous for so long that they make it that they get terrified, and they just want to make sure that that I cease to exist. And it also looks like making sure that, hey, Hispanic families, that they don't have to fear not living together. They don't have to fear not knowing whether or not, hey, is this my mom? Is this my dad's last day here living with me? Will they be taken away from me? Well, am I going to be sent to a cage? Like that's not what freedom looks like. Us jumping into those struggles and helping. That's what freedom looks like. Us jumping into the oppressed communities and helping any way we can. And that's what the will of God is. You were created to be a co-laborer of Christ. Again, I already said all this. This is just repetition. But if you didn't get it before, you can get it now. This is what we were called to be. Our Christian and ethical stance needs to be rooted in the question, what are you doing, Jesus? Where can I find you? And whatever the answer to that is, then you run to that and you start helping one way or the other. Maybe your gift is to be able to help in a certain community, and maybe my gift is to be able to help in another community. We need to find out what our gifts are, where Jesus is calling us, and making sure that it aligns not only with the past Jesus, but it aligns with the future Jesus as well. We're coming into a new age. We need to start breaking the status quo. We need to start rebuilding our church walls. We need to start rebuilding our home, and we need to start rebuilding our communities. And it starts with making sure we are all on the road to freedom. I know I talked a lot, but I hope you guys sort of understood one way or the other kind of what the ethics of a Christian is, kind of what the behavior of a Christian is. If I didn't make it clear, then let me know, and maybe I can get Pastor Adam on here and he can kind of help me with this dialogue and help me kind of redefine what I'm trying to say, because I know he understands me a little bit better. But yo, and if you don't understand me, if you don't understand Pastor Adam, God of the Oppressed by James Cone, right? Go straight to the source. Read this book, really good. And thank you for watching our Rutabagas of the Spirit. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on those post notifications. You don't want to miss any of our sermons. We're being really consistent with those. Make sure to watch our past sermons. Make sure to watch our future sermons. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook because we got a lot of dope content there. And make sure to hit our link in bios to learn ways to get involved, learn ways to give, and all that good stuff. But yeah, guys, make sure to show some extra love and compassion today. And stay safe, stay blessed, and wear your mask. Please, we're still in a pandemic, so just make sure to wear your mask. 6 feet social distancing, all that good stuff. All right, peace, bye, I'm out. Deuces, love y'all.